right, thanks y'all for coming. I'm Brent Bennett. I'm the policy director for the Life Powered campaign at the foundation. So myself and Carson, who's back there in the back, and Michael and Cullen is our team doing energy here at the foundation. We've been doing electricity panel at least for, I think this might be our sixth one during my time here. So this is our kind of, annual subject that first we had the winter storm 5 years ago, and now we've got data centers and demand growth. There's always something going on in this space. We've made a lot of, so we really appreciate the interest in the panel and appreciate having y'all here. We've made a lot of improvements since the storm in 2021, and now we have this new challenge of demand growth, and how are we going to meet that and still provide affordable rates for everyone else? The problem is that through it all, we haven't really addressed the problem of overinvesting in wind, solar, and storage, and the fact that we are increasingly relying on those resources to meet demand growth. Texas has added 31 gigawatts of solar, 17 of energy storage, and 11 of wind since 2021, but only 3 gigawatts of gas. That's the handout that you have there. It's the front page of that kind of gives some data about that. So even as we've improved the operational performance of what we have, we've got, our team is performing better in operating the grid in our power plants. We got to get more of the right recruits into the system, right? And we got to get more of the right kinds of power and the right mix of power, and that's the challenge that we face right now. Demand growth is an opportunity. It's an opportunity and a challenge. It's an opportunity to build a better grid. Just as we did with refineries and other industrial loads in the 20th century, right? The scale can also help, as we grow the grid, we can also help to lower rates if we're building the right things. It also magnifies existing problems. So how do we turn this explosive growth into an asset rather than a liability, right? That's the goal. Is we want to turn growth. We view growth as an asset here in Texas, unlike some other places, and we want to make sure that this growth is an asset to the whole state and not a liability. So to help us answer that question, we have 4 great panelists here to my right, my left. Normally we invite 4 to maybe 5 people with the expectation that 2 or 3 will show up. This time everybody said yes, which is
happy to be here.
Which is wonderful. That does mean we're going to need to be a little more structured with our time. So I'll kind of go, in order, asking everyone questions. So we'll have about 40 minutes of discussion with them, so they can each get about 10 minutes, and then that'll leave us with 20 minutes for questions at the end. So please be thinking about your questions as we move through the panel. But without further ado, here's our panelist. So my immediate left here is Brandon Seal. Brandon serves as a senior advisor to VoltaGrid, which is the largest energy-as-a-service company in the U.S., based in Houston, although he's in San Antonio. And they're a leader in procuring dedicated power for data centers. Brandon previously served as the president of the West Texas Gas Utility. It's the 5th largest investor-owned gas utility in the state until its sale in 2024. And over a decade ago, he was among the first Americans to drill oil wells in New Mexico, including the first unconventional shale well in that country's history. Is that right? Yeah. That's a pretty cool piece of history. To his left is Senator Kevin Sparks. Senator Sparks is a lifelong resident of Midland, Texas. I'm a native of Midland as well, so proud to have him. And he's accumulated nearly 40 years of experience in the oil and gas industry, including serving as CEO of his family business, Discovery Operating. He served in the Texas Senate since 2023 and was recently named chairman of the Senate Natural Resource Committee. The Senate Natural Resources actually manages oil and gas, but not electricity. That is Business and Commerce, and Senator Sparks is also on the Business and Commerce Committee now. Next to his left is Representative Jared Patterson. Representative Patterson has served in the Texas House for 4 terms, serving District 106, covering parts of Denton and Frisco, north of Dallas. He was the chairman of the Local and Consent Calendars Committee last year. He has the distinction of being one of, I believe, only 2, is that right, 2 legislators with extensive experience in the electricity business. We had Representative Cunningham on this panel last year, and he's the other one. Representative Patterson is currently an executive vice president with Able Energy Management, which offers consulting and brokerage services to electricity buyers. So we have some real industry expertise sitting over here. And finally, we have Representative John McQueenie. Representative McQueenie was elected to the Texas House in 2024, representing District 97 in Southwest Fort Worth. He's currently serving on the House State Affairs Committee, which manages electricity policy from the House, among many other issue areas. When he's not serving the people of Texas, Representative McQueen's diverse business ventures range from owning fast food franchises to, I have it right, a FedEx contracting entity that operates more than 50 trucks. So what I think is cool about our model of governance in Texas is that we have a lot of people who have good business expertise that are willing to serve in the legislature, and so we're really blessed with that. And these three men up here really represent that. Actually, we'll get to it towards the end, but the committee that Representative McQueen sits on is actually having a hearing on this very subject right now over the Capitol. So if he has to leave, we think he's okay. If he has to leave for some reason, that's why. But we'll start with Brandon here and kind of set the stage for things. Brandon, you've built power and energy projects in many places, other countries included. Why are so many data centers coming to Texas? I guess what are the things that we are doing well to continue to attract industry, and not just data centers, but continued growth in the energy business, both upstream and downstream? What are the things that we're doing right in this regard?
So Brent mentioned VoltaGrid. So VoltaGrid today has 1.5 gigawatts of power deployed and producing today, 2.5 gigawatts under construction, and 3 more gigawatts on order. And so for context of size, 2.5 to 3 gigawatts is probably about the size of the entire city of Austin in terms of the market, in terms of the load that they consume on an average day. So these are city-sized power plants that are getting built to serve data centers and other large load customers. Why Texas? The short answer is energy abundance in Texas, but the more precise answer is gas. And it's not just the availability of gas in basins like the Haynesville and the Eagle Ford and, of course, the Permian, but it's also the speed with which you can build a gas pipeline. There's 200,000 miles of intrastate pipeline in this state. You don't have to go through FERC. You don't have to do a full NEPA review. You can get a pipeline to almost anywhere in the state in about 12 months, which relates to the other factor of why this stuff is coming to Texas, just speed generally of permitting, air permitting, zoning. Texas still feels like a place where people want to build things, and that matters. That narrows the funnel significantly as these hyperscalers and other folks are looking across the country to build this stuff. As we remind people, these guys are self-interested parties. They're capitalists. They're out doing this for their own good, but so are the people who built the railroads. And you definitely didn't want to be in a town that didn't get a railroad 100 years ago. It affected your financial fortunes for a century, and there's some parallels to that going on right now, too, that Texas is benefiting from. The kind of follow-up question I think embedded in there is why off-grid? Why are they building these enormous power plants, in some cases behind the meter, in some cases off-grid, but in many cases behind the meter? The answer there, again, relates to speed. ERCOT has the shortest interconnection queue, shortest interconnection times really of anywhere in the country. It's still a strength of ERCOT and here of Texas, but it's still not fast enough. I mean, these guys are looking to build these things in 12 and 18 months, and the ERCOT interconnection queue may be 36 months. But that's not the only factor is getting interconnected to ERCOT. The other factor is how long is it actually going to take your service provider in that area, without naming names, to come and actually tie you into power? And are they going to get there when they say they're going to get there? And are they going to have as much load available in 3 to 5 years as they say they are? You can finance the purchase of gas generators. You can't finance uncertainty in a timeline. And so these guys are choosing the certainty of financing gas generators and installing them in place. The other factor, too, is that the size of what these guys are asking for is unprecedented. If you show up anywhere in the state and you need 1 megawatt of power, you can probably squeeze that out of the grid somewhere. If you show up and you need 100 or 200, and the grid's not designed to deliver 200 megawatts to that point, you're talking major investment in transmission and distribution, T&D, and that's the stuff that can really take 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, power lines, transmission lines, and things like that. All right, getting now to a little bit of the more delicate things, and maybe more the point of this panel, the other third hard reality that I hope isn't a surprise to anybody in this room is that the ERCOT market is not designed to send stable and reliable price signals. It is designed around scarcity pricing. Scarcity pricing is what is supposed to get people to build power plants to supply gaps and to supply the reliability that we need. Well, these guys are going to spend billions of dollars over many years in electricity, and that uncertainty is something that they have to bring in-house. They have to take control of. But it's not just the uncertainty of price, it's also the uncertainty of dispatch, to make sure they have the power when they need it, where they need it, and they don't have to rely on sending it across power lines 200 miles away with a bunch of other users in between. That's the other solution and the reason why you build it on-site behind the meter. The interesting thing that this is creating is a little bit of a segmented market, I guess you'll say. That what you're doing is you're having people that are coming and paying for enhanced reliability off the grid or supplemental to the grid, which maybe is how it should work. I mean, maybe that's how a market should work at the end of the day. I mean, most of us can live with 4 or 5 interruptions to the power in our house each year, and it's not going to materially affect us. But these people, they can't shut off the compute. They can't, if power prices spike to $9,000 per megawatt hour, they can't just turn off these machines. That would be catastrophic to their models or to their business. And so they're demanding a level of reliability. They describe it in terms of nines. 99.9% is 3 nines, 99.99 is 4 nines. That's 5 minutes of downtime per year. And so to make sure that they have that, they're paying that power to be located on site. The last point I'll make to wrap up is I think we are seeing a very interesting kind of natural experiment play out here. Again, going back to the scale of these facilities, building 2.3 gigawatt power systems, that's a grid. I mean, that's not a power off-taker anymore. You're building your own power system. And I think it's interesting the fuel mix that these guys are using to do this. They're not using wind, and they're not using solar, and to a much more limited extent, they're not really using batteries. It's gas. Now, there'll be press releases, and they will advertise when they're able to integrate other fuel sources into their mix. But by and large, almost without exception, the base load for all this stuff is gas. And I think it ought to at least give us pause or let us have a conversation around what are the factors of our larger grid that are not incentivizing that same fuel mix that maybe we should evaluate closely going forward.
You went through the first 3 of my questions, so
Well, you sent them to me in advance,
we still. So
It flowed.
Well, that was great. It was great. No, so we have a little bit more time for you.
Very efficient.
Yeah, exactly. I'll get one more for you before we go to Senator Sparks. How does this work and kind of what is the kind of comparison between how data centers operate now and how industrial loads of the past operated, right? Like and this is one reason why more of them are going off grid, right? Both just kind of describe for the audience in terms of what does a refinery look like to the grid? Why in the past did most of our refineries have their own generation, but they are still integrated to the grid? Versus now we're seeing this trend of going entirely off grid.
Yeah, I mean, historically, most industrial concerns, even if they had relatively high load factors, if they were consuming most of the electricity they had built out for most of the time, they weren't at 99.9% 24/7. I mean, that's just a material difference. I mean, refineries, petrochemical plants, there are certain processes, steel manufacturing, there are things you can't cool down and that you don't ever want to stop and don't interrupt. But it is a radical change to how we have supplied industrial concerns. And imagine how those averaged out, too, across the grid historically, too, that when one was up, one was down. If you had nodal pricing spike in one area, well, you had rational actors that could say, like, Jesus, electricity's $9,000 a megawatt hour right now, like, let's turn it down a little bit and we can turn it back on later. With the way that this compute works, with this new data infrastructure of our lives, you don't have that flexibility, and that the numbers that you're talking about are just so large. The effects on the grid itself, if you don't have ride-through, if you have somebody that's consuming 200 megawatts in one spot, and all of a sudden it ramps down 30%, because it can also do that. The variability, the transient load of these large compute centers can vary pretty wildly at times too. The grid is not set up for that, right now either. So truthfully, we want them as citizens of Texas, as retail consumers of electricity, we want these guys to be building their generation as close to their load as possible. That's the best possible thing for the grid. I mean, what's the saying, we joke, is that Texas is adding 10 million people over the next 10 years, and they're not bringing their own water. Well, these guys are bringing their own power, actually, and that's a good thing, because you do want that co-located as much as possible. But it's creating radically different dynamics, and if things continue on the trajectory we're going, we will have a lot of generation in this state. What we don't know yet is whether it's going to be able to get to all the different points of the state that need it when they need it.
Yeah, and I think that's one point I want to emphasize what you said is that it's not just how much load is being consumed, but the variability of that, right? Like historically, our large loads were petrochemical power plants, pipelines, compressors, things like that have a steadier load profile. These things can go from, vary by tens of megawatts per second. And just to put that in perspective, I mean, that's like, you're talking thousands of homes. It's like a small power plant, and that much variability in a matter of seconds. And it's very hard, it's very hard to integrate that into the grid and keep the frequency stable on the grid, right? So it's not just how much power they consume, but the variability. So in a way, it's like, yeah, we have to figure out long-term how to manage this. One of the big questions that ERCOT's addressing right now in interconnection standards. And so I think it's good that we make it easy and Texas does. I think there's more we can do, but it's good that we make it easy for these guys to experiment with their systems off-grid, to do what the things they need to do, because then hopefully we can integrate those learnings as we have more on-grid.
Well, and there's one last thing I'll put out there that I'm not qualified to explain because I'm a gas guy, but when it comes to power systems, one of the best ways to handle that variability historically is inertia. When you have rotating equipment, you have turbines and things like that. It's like a giant flywheel. You know, it can absorb that energy and put it back into the system when it needs it. When you have a lot of inverter-based resources, direct current, solar, wind, and things like that, it doesn't provide any inertia to the grid. And so that's just like a whole other dimension to grid stabilization. That is another reason, too, why these guys want this power located close to their site, close to where they have it, and with some inertia to be able to absorb some of that variability.
And some of it is so rapid that the turbines can't even spin fast enough. They have to pair it with batteries, too, or capacitors. Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing the innovation that's going on out there. You never see it, but we are developing new ways to build power, and hopefully we can get more of that on grid.
And that is part of the good news, too, is that, like, you know, for the last 10 or 20 years, I think we've all said, like, we need investment in the grid. So we found a way to get it. It's coming from this largely private source at this point, but it presents its own challenges, too.
Yeah, I think that's the reason for optimism, is that eventually if we can start to orient our policies correctly, then that's, you know, hopefully we can get some of these things that are being learned out there in the private sector and off-grid, and integrate more of that into how we operate our grid as a whole. And so speaking of policies, I'll go to our three legislators here. Starting with Senator Sparks, you know, your district is probably seeing more data center development than almost anywhere in the state, anywhere in the country, really. So talk about from your perspective, and as you hear from your constituents day in and day out, what are the opportunities and challenges that are being brought to your desk?
Sure, thank you. So my district is primarily the Permian Basin and the Panhandle, and then Senator Perry is Lubbock, kind of carved out of the middle, goes to Wichita Falls, Abilene, and San Angelo, and between the two of us, we represent 87 counties all across West Texas. And so I think we likely are the biggest potential developer of data centers, right? We've got, I think at last count, we've got 22 on the books. You know, I would tell you, I don't believe that all of those ultimately get built. It feels, from someone whose history has been in the oil and gas industry, knows about booms and busts, this feels very much like a gold rush to me. And, you know, if you're familiar with how gold rushes work, the Alaskan gold rush lasted less than 2 years. And so, while I'm optimistic that there will be data centers that are built, I think there's an awful lot of speculation that's built into a number of these projects, and that's one of the things we need to be careful of. I think there's tremendous opportunity for our rural communities. You know, there's a lot of concern. You know, our grid right now is not set up to handle a lot of new load, and investing with a lot of these data center projects, I know they're saying they're bringing their own power, but there's something that they're not telling us, I think, about ultimately what they want that to look like. And so I think that's why a lot of our communities are concerned. They don't want the price of their electricity going through the roof just to supplement new technology that's coming in. So right now, TPPF tells me that our residential electric rates, we're 27th out of 50 in the nation. Think about that. The Permian Basin is the most energy-rich region in the lower 48, but as far as our electric rates for our residential customers, we're right in the middle. Why? Well, why shouldn't we be number one, or at least in the top 5, right? So I think there's legitimate concern there. The other concern that our communities have centers around water. And this whole region that has all of these data centers being facilitated are all very cognizant of where we stand on water resources. And so I think the potential there is, if we do it well, we'll have companies like Brandon's that will bring power, that will insist that we have higher reliability, They also have the ability, because of the amount of capital that comes with them, to improve our water sources as well. And if our communities do a good job of the deals that they construct and who they allow really to come into their area, we'll make sure that these data centers don't pull all of our water. Because there's a lot of different technology, just like we have on the electric side, a lot of different technology on how you cool these things. And not all of them require, vast amounts of water. And so we ought to be requiring that.
And you mentioned, the affordability issue, and one piece of that that's being grappled with right now, actually, there's comments due with the Public Utility Commission on Monday regarding transmission costs, right? And so, just tell us a little bit about, the challenges with transmission. There's the need to build infrastructure, but then also there's impacts to that, and there's also cost to that, right? There's land impacts, there's costs. So tell us a little bit about what's going on and how are we thinking about managing that? Because there's an ability for data centers to help us grow our grid, but there's also challenges of socializing costs and reliability to residential consumers.
Yeah, socializing costs. That's a very diplomatic way to say you guys are going to pay for all of this. That's what that really means. So right now, and I don't know how many of you guys, I'd be interested to know, how many of you guys have heard about the 765 kV lines that have been proposed for Texas? Oh, quite a few. We got a pretty astute audience here. So
our stuff a lot, which is good, I guess.
Good for y'all. So the PUC did a study and decided that the oil and gas industry out in West Texas is short on electricity. And so their idea was how we fix that. We're going to build 3 separate lines of ultra-high voltage that start kind of in central Texas and make their way, total of about 12 to 1,400 miles of these ultra-high voltage lines. So you think about that and go, okay, well, wait a minute. We're sitting on the most energy-rich region in the United States. Why are we importing electricity? That's the first question, right? How come we don't, as Brandon suggested, why don't we generate the electricity right there and build out the regional infrastructure? There's no doubt that the energy industry, oil and gas industry, when we moved from a vertical world to a horizontal world, our electric needs shifted tremendously. And honestly, our industries didn't do a very good job of planning for that. So we need the electricity, but we have the ability to do that. We have the ability to create gas-fired power generation. We need the regional infrastructure to move that electricity around. But going back to the 765, you go, okay, well, maybe we do need some transmission lines. But what's being built on the east side of those lines that's going to create the electricity that the oil and gas industry needs? And the answer is nothing. Literally, there is nothing on the books on the east side of these lines that's going to generate power to send out there. So what are we really doing, right? We learned that before Trump took office, $92 billion went out through the Department of Energy just before he took office for new Green Deal projects. A lot of that money is still trying to find its way to Texas in the form of wind, solar, and battery projects. We already have what they consider stranded intermittent power out in West Texas, and so I would argue that mostly what these lines are going to do are going to create avenues to allow that electricity to get out of West Texas. And the $30 or $40 billion that they've estimated those lines are going to cost are going to be paid by you guys, residential ratepayer.
I think that's what we have to look at is we need transmission infrastructure to meet demand and to balance the system. But the degree to which we are building it this much, I mean, these lines are humongous capacity, is really being driven by the fact that we're trying to meet that demand with distant wind and solar. And if the data centers are telling us what they need, which is local gas. And so what we have to do is to dig into why is our market not providing that, right? If it was, then we could dramatically reduce the need for how much transmission we're building. And then not only that, one thing that's important is we have a competitive wholesale market where generators can build where they want. We have a competitive retail market where you can set up a data center wherever the grid allows you to interconnect, right? Or you have our cities are growing a lot too, right? There's not just data center growth, but the growth of our cities. The lines that connect those are determined in a centrally planned manner by ERCOT and the PUC, and those costs are socialized to everyone. Right now, in the past, we had a lot of it made sense to share those costs because the lines were coming into the industry was in the cities, the power plants, we'd have power plants outside the cities to bring the power in. We needed to trade some power between the cities. The benefits and costs were kind of shared among everyone. But now we have the first instance of this was the CREZ lines that were built to bring wind from the Panhandle. That was the first time we kind of did a special project to serve a certain constituency. The problem with these 765 lines now is they are being used to serve specific constituency, but we still have this socialization of cost. And so that's what we have to fix now, is to get that right. And then we also have to look at, okay, what can we do to make sure that we aren't just going to keep building and building and building transmission instead of building generation where it needs to be. So I just kind of wanted to follow up on that, what you were saying. But I think I've got to check our time here just to make sure I'll let you kind of start answering this question. We can let Representative Patterson kind of finish it. We talk about the need to build gas. We're talking about that now, close to where demand is. But we've only built 3 gigawatts of new gas in the last 5 years since Uri. Even as demand has grown 12, 13 gigawatts, we're going to have 25 gigawatts of demand growth in the next few years easily. So double the rate of growth at least. And yet the gas generation is still not that, I would say 80 to 90% of the queue right now is wind, solar, and storage, and maybe 10% is gas, right? So how do we get that balance fixed, right? What do we need to do to start, changing that paradigm? Because it's obvious what the demand is for, and yet the market is providing the opposite, right?
Yeah, well, I'll just briefly say that there are a number of large entities that are making really good money off of the scarcity, and those folks don't want to see any change in the market structure. And so that's really the uphill battle. We faced it. Representative Patterson and I shared a bill last session that when it began to move over in the House, you can't even imagine the amount of clamor that took place. There was wailing and gnashing of teeth, and a lot of lobbyists descended upon both of our offices to really kind of snuff this thing out. And so really, I think that's a good entree. I'll let you talk a little more about that.
Yeah, this is something I've worked on.
See him loosen his jacket like he's ready to go into a boxing match.
I'm ready to fight on this one. I've been working on this policy since I first got into the Texas legislature in 2019 with one of my first bills. I had to turn it into a study bill to even get a hearing in front of State Affairs as a freshman, but I've been working on this issue for a long time. So here's the bottom line, guys. You're getting screwed by wind and solar. That's the bottom line. But really, it's the federal government that's doing it, because you can't really blame the companies that are investing in it, because they're just investing in it because the federal government's saying, here's all these tax credits that we're going to give you to invest in wind and solar. And so they do. And at the same time, especially during the Obama administration, is where it really picked up. Y'all heard of these ESG scores and carbon footprint and all these things? Well, the problem is they convince the entire society that everybody needs to be concerned about that and that they need to buy into these products. And so what's happened is that a lot of industries, especially here in Texas, even oil and gas industries, have bought in to try to lower their ESG or raise their ESG score and lower their carbon footprint. And these are oil and gas companies that by nature produce oil and gas. And so, so they buy into these projects. So what happened last session on this bill specifically is, I have spoken on panels alongside many of these folks, so it was very frustrating when it went down the way that it did. But, we got movement on this bill to, this socialization of costs. Guess what's very expensive? to have wind and solar that works sometimes, and you have to pay to have a backup available for the wind and solar is not working. That's one of the reasons why we're 27th and not first or second.
And who's paying for that backup right now?
That's right. All ratepayers are paying for that. So all ratepayers are paying for that backup. So what Senator Sparks' bill did that I had the honor of carrying in the House this session was saying, okay, all this billions of dollars in excess cost that is on the grid that you all pay through your electricity bills every month, let's put that onto the people that actually caused the problem. Let's put that on the wind and solar people that are causing this excess cost to be in the marketplace, right? Yeah, it's a good thought, right? The problem is, as we found out this session, because some of these problems you learn every session because they don't come out of the woodwork until it actually gets legs and goes. And so we had the votes to get it out of state affairs, and then all hell broke loose. And what happened is that, you know, a lot of these oil and gas companies, a lot of these big industries in Texas, they have all signed up for these 25-year power purchase agreements through wind and solar to try to help their ESG scores and play good to Wall Street, which, you know, I'm not discounting. I mean, you know, they have shareholders to, you know, I mean, I understand that piece of it. But they came out of the woodwork and said, if you change this, then they can invoke the change in law provision on my 25-year PPA, and they're going to raise my cost that I have locked in for the next 25 years for power. And so that was one of the big things that we uncovered and one of the big roadblocks that we ran into. And so we ended up, we did get it out of state affairs. Folks hung with me, like Representative McQueenie here, hung with me, and we got the bill out of state affairs, but that's unfortunately where it died. In calendars. We knew at that point it wouldn't get out of calendars. But look, at the end of the day, Texas has the best grid in the nation, in part because it's our grid and it's not everybody else's grid. But we have the best grid in the nation, or else we wouldn't be growing like we're growing. You know, if I was sitting here in Cincinnati or Detroit, I would have a much different outlook on, you know, what the future looks like from a business perspective. So these are all good problems to have in terms of people wanting to come here and figuring out how we're going to make it all work. But there is still a lot of work to be done. I mean, folks are investing billions, and sometimes hundreds of billions of dollars in Texas because they believe in what we have here in Texas, and that's a good thing.
And the good news is we have the energy to supply them.
Yes.
That's the good news. The bad news is we've got to have the political will to make the adjustments to our ERCOT market in order to facilitate that.
Well, and you know, the CREZ lines were mentioned earlier, and this is a soapbox of mine from a while ago. But, you know, it was billions of dollars and billions of dollars over cost to build power lines out to West Texas to bring wind power into the load centers in the Metroplex. Wind power, which, you know, blows from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. when we don't really need power. Now, they'll brag on, you know, April 9th when it's 70 degrees outside, and, oh, you know, wind and solar is generating 70% of our power needs today. But what they don't tell you is that when we have a winter storm Uri, or when we have the winter storm that we had just, you know, the ice storm that we had up in North Texas just this last winter, it's not wind and solar that is actually producing the power that we need. It's almost exclusively natural gas that is producing the power that we need. We have it. We have more of it. We need to get more of it to market. We need to get the feds out of the business of incentivizing wind and solar. We need to get the feds, the EPA, out of the way of telling us where we can build power plants and where we can't. And we need to have the market signals and the market structure for a while to send signals to people that they will invest in Texas in those ways.
It's hard to follow on that anymore.
All right, on to my question.
I'll do my best.
I got to get to a committee hearing? No.
No, I got one more for Representative Patterson before we get to you, Representative McQueenie. So, no, I just wanted you to elaborate a little bit. I was at a conference a couple days ago with Deputy Energy Secretary Danley, who used to be on the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, and James, you know, made a good point that one of the challenges that we face in all of our electricity markets, of which ERCOT is one, right? ERCOT covers 90% of Texas, but this is true of everywhere else around the country, is the fact that, you know, we have to discriminate, maybe discriminate is not the right word, distinguish between the different characteristics of different resources, and our markets aren't doing that. This is one of the things that their bill was trying to accomplish, is that, you know, we pay a single clearing price for energy for all resources in the market. So if you're a wind and solar generator, a gas generator, so on, you know, the market clears at one price. This is true in capacity markets too. The market clears at one price. Well, the problem is that wind and solar don't have the same capacity value. They don't have the same ability. By capacity, I mean what you produce now, you can guarantee that you're going to produce at a certain point in the future, right? That variability of wind and solar is not being priced correctly. So what that means is that's why the cost is socialized. So just explain, I guess, just explain a little bit more about, as an electricity buyer, someone that works with electricity buyers, like, how do you see this in the market? How do you see the variability increasing in the cost of that? This, again, how is this being socialized, right? I mean, I think that's what we're really trying to get at here.
Yeah, it's a real problem, and it's the reason why we went years. I mean, you're talking about the three that we have coming online, here soon in the works. We went years with zero investment in natural gas generation in Texas. Years. Meanwhile, we're growing rapidly. Our business community is growing rapidly, and we have years where no one was investing in natural gas generation. And why? And the why is because people are getting paid to build wind and solar. Once the wind and solar is up, then it's free to generate electricity from that. Of course, there's costs that we've already discussed that are socialized amongst everyone else that they don't pay. But wind has a break even of about negative 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. So think about like your monthly bill that you pay. Wind power breaks even at basically negative 2.3 cents per kilowatt hour. It is very difficult for someone to be able to compete for that.
Well, explain to them how it can break even at negative.
Yeah. So the government gives them a tax credit. The federal out of one pocket, the federal government is coming in and taking your money and hand it over to the wind guys to pay them to be able to generate electricity. So when they get a production tax credit, is what it's called. The wind guys do. They get a production tax credit. So they get a tax credit that the big bankers on Wall Street take. And they turn that into revenue, and so they get paid to be able to generate electricity. Versus the natural gas guys, they have to buy their infrastructure, they have to buy natural gas, they have to generate that, they have to keep their machines working, all these things, and it costs them money to generate electricity, right? Now, the solar incentives are very different. The solar is called an investment tax credit. They're basically getting paid to build it, so it's kind of different, but it's like 14x what wind gets. It's really egregious. On what the incentives are there. But so the structure in ERCOT before Winter Storm Uri was essentially lowest price to the table, right? Which kind of makes sense. I mean, in a competitive environment, you want the lowest cost megawatt to be that next megawatt that's brought on, right? Well, the problem is when you're paying people to generate electricity, that lowest cost megawatt is always going to be wind and solar. And so for years and years and years, we went through this process of all this wind stuff being built, you guys paying for the transmission infrastructure, you guys also paying for the tax credits through your federal taxes and then back. And so we had this situation where nobody was building power plants. But in 2021, when Winter Storm Uri happened, everything changed in the grid. Everything changed. It might as well not even be called ERCOT, honestly, because the wholesale market is different, the retail market is different, everything is different. The PUC is different, ERCOT board is different, everything is different, right? And so we're trying to get towards that path of not necessarily advocating for the lowest cost megawatt, but advocating for the most reliable megawatt. And if we can ever crack that nut, that's ultimately, I think, what's going to save our grid for the foreseeable future is how do we get the money in the hands of the people that are there when we need it? I don't want to hear about what percentage of load wind and solar produced over the course of a year. It's irrelevant. I don't care what produced at 3 a.m. I care what produced at 4 to 9 p.m. on August 17th, and I care what produced from 1 a.m. to 6 a.m. on February 12th. That's the only thing you care about. Have you ever heard the term, don't build your church for Easter Sunday? ERCOT has to build their church for Easter Sunday. When you go to that light switch and you flip it, it has to come on. The only thing that matters at peak. Nothing else matters. And so we've got to shift the discussion away from, wind and solar was 70% on April 9th, or wind and solar did 40% of our load this year. It doesn't matter. What happened at peak? It's the only thing that matters. And so that's the nut that we have to crack.
There we go. And further to that point, I think that it's, again, it's really key that we have two things. One is that we have some distinction between resources, and also that we have, that we reduce the volatility. and so that you can finance power plants, right? I think those are the two things that we kind of have to crack, and we're working on that as much as we can. But it's tough because there's so much. I'll use the term inertia again, but we've already built so much. We have as much installed capacity of wind and solar now in the system as we do of everything else. And then they're going to be receiving, even though the tax credits are set to expire in a few years, they're going to be receiving, the units that are already in the system have that already baked in. And they are already, and again, the price distortions exist. So, and also the fact that even once the subsidies go away, we still have this problem of the way our market's designed to admit the lowest cost megawatts first without any kind of distinction between the resources means that these guys are dispatched first. It's really hard as a gas power plant to go in and say, I don't know what price I'm going to get paid or, huh? Oh, really? Okay, mic's on. I'll try and talk a little bit clearer. Yeah. It's really hard to finance a gas power plant when you don't know how many hours you're going to operate, what hours, and when you're operating, what the price is going to be. So there has to be more certainty in that to get to really fix this. So that's my pitch, what we're working on in my team. So we'll try to end our discussion here. We got about 8 more minutes or so. With some more positive, discussion from Representative McQueen.
Yeah. Hey,
about,
hey guys.
Well, we have the opportunity to fix a lot of the things that are going on. It's a good thing is that we have the opportunity to continue to change policy. So what is the state affairs looking at today? What are the big issues on the table in the interim hearing today? And then going forward into the next session, what are some of the things that you want to see?
This is probably where I make a joke about like I should be over there right now. Yeah. Just a couple things to touch on a couple things that have already been talked about real quick. The one thing that this room and this group up here should be very proud of is the work that the Trump administration is doing. In all seriousness, they are taking this power generation thing very seriously. There was a lack of investment in natural gas turbines, and the Trump administration, through the work of Secretary Lutnick, literally went to these generators and said, you guys need to do this or we're going to get somebody else that will. So you're going to see a lot more of these natural gas burning turbines coming onto the system very quickly. It is very clear that the Trump administration is open for business, and I think that's going to fix a lot of our problems. So because we haven't had that investment in it. So today at State Affairs, we're talking about data centers. We've got interim charges from the Lieutenant Governor and from the Speaker of the House that are very focused on the data center issue. I think there's a lot of different facts out there that are not necessarily 100% true about data centers. You've got some bad actors that are probably highlighted more than any of the ones that are actually doing the right things. So from a data center perspective, I'm going to talk about the 5 or 6 R's related to data centers. So first off, we need some guardrails. We've got to do this responsibly in the state of Texas, but the state of Texas cannot miss this economic boom. We cannot sit here and say we're closed for business. That's not how we got to where we are as a state. So we've got to make sure that we handle it responsibly, and that leads to making sure that the people that are going online and asking for these loads are not passing on to ratepayers. The ratepayers need to be taken care of and protected, and that's part of the guardrails, and that's part of being responsible. So we talk a lot about property tax relief in the state. We understand it's a massive problem. We've also got to look at the revenue side of things. There's a spending problem in certain areas, but there's also a revenue problem. So these data centers come into some of these communities, and they are a massive revenue source for these communities because they're not putting kids in the schools, but they're going to go pay massive amounts of local taxes. In Tarrant County, the largest taxpayer is Meta. They don't put any kids. That data center that Meta operates, they're the largest taxpayer in Tarrant County, in Fort Worth ISD, Tarrant Regional Water District, and they're not putting a single kid in the schools. So there's a revenue issue where we've got to make sure that we're being responsible about that. And the state of Texas is not closed for business. That's not why we're here. That's not why any of us are up here. That's not why everybody's moving here. So we've got to be. I'm going to keep going back to the responsible R, but we've got to make sure that we're looking at revenue, which that provides. So. These data centers provide a readiness in your life. Everybody in this room expects their Wells Fargo app to work. They expect to be able to go on American Airlines and book a flight. They expect their phones to work. They expect to be able to go on Facebook and pull up a picture from 7 years ago. So these data centers are, I mean, seriously, I mean, these data centers provide a readiness for everyday life that we've got to be able to understand. I mean, we are not going backwards in a society of being connected. Nobody's turning these smartphones in and saying, I want my Nokia flip phone anymore. We're in a race with China. I mean, it is, that's why the Trump administration has taken this so seriously. This is a national security threat. We are in a race with China about this, and we cannot give up on that race. Texas has got to be responsible about the guardrails, and we got to be smart about it, but we've got to continue to be in that race, and we're not going to give up on that. So, and then there's an element where these data centers provide reliability for the electric grid. It's important to understand that with the passage of Senate Bill 6, these guys have got to be able to have a ratchet back when the system needs the power that they're taking. Most of these data centers, if not all of them, come online with a backup generation. And so if the grid needs power, they will go turn their load down so that we can go make sure that on February 12th, when it's 5 in the morning, everybody's heaters are turning on, everybody's coffee pots are turning on, that we've got the power that your lights all come on. So these data centers and the associated power that's being built with them, and the data center operators now, it used to be something they were willing to do, the good operators were willing to do, but now it's a requirement that all of them do. They do provide a increased reliability of our electric grid. So, I think there are bad actors out there. I think, like I said, we've got to be responsible. We've got to have guardrails, and we've got to make sure that we're doing it correctly. But the state of Texas cannot be on the sidelines with this economic boom when it has so many far-reaching impacts. So we're working through that state affairs. We've got the PUC and ERCOT. We've got some rulemaking stuff that we're working through. We've got to make sure that we're not going to go leave ratepayers. They're talking about significant money being invested if you want to come on the grid. And that will ensure that the ratepayers are not going to get stuck with these burdens and everything else. So they're your R's of data centers from our perspective, and
I love that
continue on.
framing. Yeah, and I'll touch on 2 points there. One is that I think a good framing is to look at. There's a lot of parallels between data and energy, not just the fact that it takes energy to use data, but also you look at Texas has been an energy producer for 100+ years, and we've exported energy to, all places around the country and also, now more recently across the world. That is, the benefits of that low-cost energy are very diffuse. It's hard to see, It's not like what you just described with data. We can be a great exporter here in Texas of data in the same way that we've done energy. And the benefits of that will redound in ways that we don't even know, just like energy has. Just like in the way that we've used energy and fossil fuels to replace human labor with machine labor. Now we have computers that can help us with mental labor and improve those productivity gains are going to be tremendous. And like you said, we're not going back. We have the experience with energy, and we can do this with data as well now to be a great exporter and to use that to build up our economy the way we have.
And we have the energy to support all of that.
Correct.
Right? If we were Nebraska, this would be a different conversation. But we have all the tools that we need to be successful in both creating the electricity and servicing all of these new data centers.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I do want to kind of keep a ray of hope there for everyone that we figured out these things before and we can again, and we just need leadership to do it. So with that, it is almost time for Q&A. Before we get to the audience, we have a new program this year called the Influencer Experience. We would like to extend the privilege of asking the first question to Andrea right there. You can find her on Instagram and other social media channels. And Andrea, go ahead and fire away with the first question, and then the rest of y'all can get your questions ready. We'll have mics there. Carson and Michael will be bringing the microphones around. So.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's the first time I talk to people about energy, so this is really interesting for me. But I'm a resident in California, and we have one of the highest costs of electricity in the country. So is there anything that Texas can learn from California and vice versa? Anything that California can learn from Texas?
More natural gas.
Well,
More natural gas produced energy. Let me answer that for everybody.
So I'll just tell you, coming from the oil and gas industry and knowing the history of California, California has all the resources it needs still. Your political power won't allow them to produce it. And so if we're not careful, Texas will eventually look like California. And so, did that answer your question?
We were told that if we only had a grid that crossed state lines, that it would be better for Texas. We were told that if we had more renewables, that it would be better for Texas. California has all those things, and they pay the highest rates. They also don't have competition. They don't have a real deregulated market in California like we do in Texas. There is so much difference between California and Texas. But the more that we do these green new scams that the federal government pays for, the more that increases our costs. The more that we entertain the idea of connecting our grid across state lines, where it not only invites more federal oversight and regulation and cost, but it also connects us with each individual state and their individual state's regulation and cost, and their decisions now affect us. And so there's all of those things that go into that, of the reason why we're not in the shape that they are. If you look at most of the states that have the highest cost electricity, they are the states with the highest renewable portfolio standards, with the most renewable energy, and all of that. And it is a farce that stuff is cheap.
And the most regulation.
Yeah, I mean, designing electricity markets in particular is hard. Like, I don't know what the natural free market would look like. We have a market in ERCOT. I don't know that it's a free market. I mean, we incentivize one thing over others. And to be charitable, too, we got to go back in history. When we designed it in the 1990s, all of our resource entities, all of our generation was thermal. It was coal, and it was gas, and it was nuclear. So it all looked and behaved kind of in similar ways. And to be charitable, California, they tried deregulation before Texas did. They had a head start on some of this stuff. And, to bring us to the present on that too, like, I don't know that there's an easy fix for any of this stuff either. Like, you have a lot of market players that have a lot of sunk capital or investments that they're tied to, PPAs or other things. You have interest groups too that certainly some benefit from the volatility and are very loud about that also. But yeah, market design is hard. It's hard to replicate the benefits of a free market in an industry that is still built around some kinds of natural monopolies, some kinds of shared infrastructure.
Yeah, and I'll add before we go to the audience questions that one opportunity we have with data centers is we have the ability to reshape our grid. I think I heard Representative Patterson say this the first time like a couple years ago. We have the ability to build new things here and to reshape our grid. California has no demand growth, basically. It's actually gone down slightly in the last decade plus. So you're stuck with kind of what you have if you're not growing. You're stuck with the assets that you have. It's very hard to renew your grid. So I think that it's important for us to recognize that we need to invite demand growth and then build the right resources to meet that growth. And that gives us the opportunity to kind of make up for the mistakes that we've made in the past. So I hope that someday California will come to that point as well.
I think what Dr. Bennett just said is you'd be very thankful you've moved to Texas.
Yeah. All right, let's go to questions there. First one is with Mr. Sparks over there. Go ahead. Oh, and by the way, make sure if you have a longer question or a statement that you want to make, we're available offline to answer questions too. So try to keep them short, relevant to the rest of the audience. Thank you.
I have a quick comment. We as ratepayers should continue to put pressure on these guys to get reliable energy done. We have a lot of natural gas in West Texas that we don't get paid because we're having to pay to get it out of the state. That means we're not making money on the natural gas. We're paying to get it off. Why is it not being utilized to put in reliable energy that can be utilized for electricity? You guys don't give up. That it's there. The reliable, there's lots of natural gas we're paying to get off. We'd love to get it into electricity.
I think you'll see that as these gas turbines come online, and that's the work that the industry is reacting to and working on. So you'll see that natural gas being used locally as soon as more turbines come online.
Yes, being I'm an engineer, I started the, hey, what's going on with baseload? Quite early on, 17 years ago. Now, one of the problems that I see about the fix that we're in, I may be right or wrong, go ahead and tell me one way or the other, is that government entwinement with this entire energy industry has been not pure. In other words, lobbyists. It was one of the heaviest lobbied issues of our century. Now, how would irresponsibility be built into the management of a critical resource, more critical, I would say, than clean air? Because you'll die in any city in America with a multi-day power loss. So we decided to have our own power grid. Great, good idea. But it became a political football almost immediately, even before work was started. So how do we get this going the right direction and put legislation in that puts us on the uninterruptible power path? Please be prescriptive in how we can help you get what we all need.
I'll take a stab at that. I'll tell you something I'm sick and tired of as a Texas House member is getting blamed for what the federal government's done to us. I don't care if it's H-1B visas. I don't care if it's wind and solar credits. I don't care if it's illegal immigration. I don't care what it is. We get blamed as Texas House members for all the world's problems. And it's very frustrating, just to be honest with you. We're not the ones that created this mess. We had a great deal working here in Texas. In Winter Storm Uri, if not for all the massive tax incentives to wind and solar, we would have had multiple new natural gas generation plants on the ground providing electricity to people and saving lives during Winter Storm Uri. If you look at the grid during Winter Storm Uri, natural gas dramatically overperformed. Certainly there were some issues out there, but it dramatically overperformed. But the federal government got in the way and got involved. So if you're asking what you can do, let's stop treating our congressmen like heroes because they ask slick questions during a committee hearing, and let's start demanding policy changes at the federal level that make our lives better. I can't point to 3 bills that Congress has passed in the last 30 years that has made my life better, but I can give you a laundry list of things that we have done in the Texas legislature that are great, honestly great conservative wins for Texas. So if there's one thing that you can do, let's start holding Congress accountable for the crap that they push down from D.C. to the state of Texas.
To quickly add a finer point to what Representative Patterson said, the tax credits were in the big beautiful bill were sunset. Basically, if you're not in construction this year, you have to be in service by 2030, right? So we're going to start to see a change over the next couple of years, but I guarantee you there are swarms of lobbyists in D.C. that are
But that's a 10-year program, though, right?
Right,
I mean,
well,
once it's on the ground.
Once it's on the ground, they get tax credits for 10 years, yeah. But these credits have been extended over and over and over again. There's a harder sunset time now than we've ever had in the past, and credit to the lawmakers who pushed for that. But that is going to be super critical in the next couple of years that we actually hold to that sunset date and allow the subsidies to expire instead of extending them as we've done more than a dozen times over the past 3 decades.
Well, and the fear is even if those sunset and those projects are not getting built in the future, we're still not necessarily sending the price signals back to dispatchable sources that we also need too.
Yeah, we still have the distortions in place as it exists, yeah.
So the other thing, you need to talk to your representatives, your senators. As Representative Patterson said, there's hardly anybody in the legislature on the Senate or the House side that understands this to any significant degree. If they did, we would pass something. But they're not getting the right signals from you guys. You need to be up in arms about the lack of reliability and the cost of your electricity at your house. That's where the pressure's got to come from for your elected officials.
Sorry, we can't hear you without the mic.
Sorry, Danny, we can't hear you.
I'll bring the mic your way if we
Bring
have
it
time.
your way in a second. Hold on.
Hi, I'm from Bastrop County. We have a number of data centers that are under construction. We have a number planning to be under construction, but they have a black eye. People don't understand the power plants you're talking about, the gas-powered plants, the recycled water. Data centers are a positive thing for the state of Texas. How do we get the message out that this is positive and should be happening? Because there's a lot of misinformation out there that continues to circulate.
It starts today. It starts days like this. I think you'll see a lot more information getting out there because you're right. They do have a black eye, and it's not 100% accurate information that's giving them the black eye. And I think you'll see efforts to get that information and that word out. You start looking at what your tax bills look like. Some of these communities are going to have zero property taxes just because of the money that the data centers are going to bring in. And so it starts today. It is, it's education about the improvement in technology. These data centers are now using, whether it's recycled water or they've got a closed loop system. A lot of these data centers are using less water than a local grocery store would. So we've got to get that information out, and I know the industry knows that.
Hi, my question is, as Texas builds out the transmission infrastructure needed to power our state's future growth and energy needs, eminent domain is sometimes required for these legitimate public projects. How can we ensure these projects respect private property rights and do not disproportionately burden particular communities or landowners?
I mean, the first R I talked about these data centers is responsibility, and we've got to have guardrails. And I think that you're going to see a lot of work from the three of us up here, as well as with TPPF, to make sure that we're handling the guardrails about being responsible on how they're built.
I was just going to add quickly, I think it's also about being responsible about what gets built and where. Again, transmission is a centrally planned thing, right? We don't have a market for that. It's ERCOT goes and tells the utilities where to build it and how. And that planning process has got to have some changes in addition to the changes in how we allocate the costs. So I think that's something that's very important for us to work on. And we got to look hard, take a hard look at how much of transmission is being built just to move wind and solar around and not actually to serve demand, legitimate needs.
There is something the state legislature can do instead of just complaining about the federal government. You can't do anything about that. But until that time, you can pass legislation that requires any new wind and solar, which is still being built, to have dispatchable power to go along with that, so they're not taking, and you're not doing that.
Well, and that's what we do. And I don't mean to say that we're doing nothing and just sitting here and pointing the finger at the federal government. We have passed a number of laws. As I mentioned earlier, ERCOT might as well not even be called ERCOT anymore because of the changes that we've done. Some of those changes that we've passed, especially as recent as 2023, haven't even been implemented yet because of the rulemaking process and all of that. So we really don't even know the full result of what we've done yet because it takes time to implement all that. And I'll give you another example of what we've done at the state level. While the federal government is coming into one of your pockets and pulling out your money and giving it to the wind and solar guys, now the state has been forced to come into your other pocket and pull out money as an incentive and hand it to the natural gas guys to build natural gas generators. We don't want to do that. We don't like to do that, but the federal government has forced our hand. They can't compete in any other way. And so we had to come up with, we waited and tried to figure out if there was a different way. And quite frankly, I don't think that it's a silver bullet, but we've tried to come up with a way to compete with the federal incentives because whether we like it or not, the market is going to do whatever is best for the market. Investors are going to do whatever is best for investors. And so with the massive amount of federal subsidies out there, that has completely shifted our entire market. We're responding to that. We're trying to change some things. We're trying to do different price signals and all that, but we're fighting industry along with it. We are doing things, but we also need to stop pretending that our federal government, that our congressmen and the federal government are somehow heroes. They need to be held accountable.
And there are rules that the legislature has passed on this new stuff that's coming online that has firming requirements to be reliable. So there's a lot of work that has been done.
Yeah.
Hi, Don Brown with Secure the Grid Coalition. There is something that we can do at the political level, of course. The Republican Party votes on the legislative priorities at the convention, the state convention coming up in June, and we can make grid security and grid the #1 legislative priorities. That sends a very strong message to the legislators. So if you are part of that, want to be part of that process, you can plug into that to make sure that your legislators are hearing that. The second question has to do with base power and how it has affected the overall security of the grid. As a consequence of all these wind and solar installations and the data center, we're getting a large number of battery energy storage systems put in, which are full of Chinese equipment and technology. And it is very important that we have guardrails around that and that our counties that are unincorporated are able to address that. So I would ask you as legislators, what are we doing to make sure that our counties that are unincorporated have a stronger voice and actually have a place to go to at the state level to slow down some of this development and address it in a more responsible way?
Well, we did pass legislation last session that is actually, and it kind of hurts as a conservative, but we're standing up a new entity within the state that's all about IT security. And it's because, you know, like in my rural district, we had 2 different water facilities in the last 2 years that have been hacked into by foreign countries. And so, you know, our smaller communities don't have the expertise to be on guard for all of that. And so in response to that, we're standing up an entity outside of San Antonio that's going to focus on kind of security risks all across the state.
Yeah, I'll also mention that we, Senator Tan Parker, I believe when he was in the House, he might have been in the Senate when he passed it, passed a bill called the Lone Star Infrastructure Protection Act. This last session, I was proud to carry the House version of an update to that, which provides up to $1 million penalty for anyone connected to the grid that has components from a hostile foreign nation. So China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, plus, which is also a hot topic right now, anyone that the governor deems, we were forward thinking here, anyone that the governor deems that should be on the list, including CARE and the Muslim Brotherhood. And so they cannot buy our land, they cannot have items invested in our grid. How many of y'all remember when Israel blew up the pagers that the terrorists had? Y'all remember that? It was such an awesome project for them, right? I mean, years in the making. But what scares me about that is that was the way Israel didn't wake up one day and say, you know what, we're going to blow up all these pagers. That was years in the making. And so what my concern is what I think you're talking about here, is when does China wake up and flip a switch and turn off our grid? And so with this update to the Lone Star Infrastructure Protection Act, we're trying to guard against those sorts of things. About having those types of components or employees from those nations on our grid.
Okay, if we got 2 questions, we can fit in if we're quick. So
very quickly,
go
2 points, two quick questions. Just out of curiosity, with this significant increase in demand in gas, being from the oil and gas industry in West Texas, how many years supply do we have that we keep adding to? I'm worried about, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? I don't know what.
Hundreds, thousands. I mean, yeah.
Okay, so that's not a problem. Secondly, lastly, why don't you take a page out of Trump's playbook? Figure a way to put an excise tax. Figure out a way to quit blaming the federal government and penalize people that take that money. Figure out some way to make it to where it's not as attractive and quit blaming them when you don't do anything to stop it.
So we've had a number of bills, and some that actually addressed it that way. Can't get any movement on those bills, and that's why I'm saying you guys have to generate the interest, because most Texans don't even know that this is a problem. You need to let your statewide officials understand you're concerned about the grid and you're concerned about your electric rates, and that'll give us some of the momentum. We've had all of those thoughts in bills that we couldn't even get out of committee.
Yes, Helen Kerwin. I represent a very rural community, and we have a lot going on with the data centers. My question is this. You have mentioned about guardrails, guidelines for the data centers. I'm just curious if you would expound a little more on those for the 90th session.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we started touching on a lot of them. I mean, geographically, they got to be in the right place. You know, there was an operator that was that's under construction in Fort Worth, and it's some screening requirements, it's noise requirements, it's water requirements, it's geographic requirements. Where this isn't going to be a massive buzzing in everybody who lives within a couple miles of these things. So the technology is continued to get better to where those guardrails and those requirements are a little bit easier. I think that in those 4 categories you'll see them, and I think that we'll probably have a lot more ideas that come from industry, from the good actors, about how we can be appropriate operators of them and help your local municipalities as they go and approve these things. So a lot of them, yeah, you've got a lot of some zoning issues that we'll probably address as well with some local municipalities too.
Yep. And we'd love to have time for more questions. That is all the time we have. We got to get to lunch next door in the Zlotnick Ballroom with Secretary of Agriculture Brooke Rollins and our former CEO and House Speaker Dustin Burrows. If you didn't get your question in and you want to do a follow-up, please see me or Carson. Either we can answer it or we can connect you with one of these folks to answer it. Thanks, y'all.